Hello all, and welcome to another episode of Happy to Do It, where we are happy to discuss all things AWS Managed Services. I'm your hostess, Betty Oblock, and I'm a program manager for the AWS MSP program. I am delighted to be interviewing Brian Quimby today. Brian is a program manager and business developer who focuses on public sector MSPs. Brian, thank you so much for being here.
Happy to be here.
Happy to be here. We know that customer selection criteria for a cloud partner becomes really, really important when you're in a heavily regulated industry, financial services, healthcare, and of course, federal and local government. It just kind of adds additional expectations and pressures on those cloud environments. So launching right in, how do public sector partners structure their managed services organizations to be best positioned to win those customer deals and then generate repeated engagements knowing that additional pressure?
Absolutely. It's a great first question, too. I've had the pleasure in my role of talking with dozens of our public sector MSP partners and also commercial sector partners who end up with public sector practices who work with public sector customers. If I was building out my own managed services practice, I think some of the best practices that I keep in mind, probably one, making sure I'm developing expertise, right? Have my employees do their AWS trainings and certifications, look into GovCloud trainings. At the practice level, making sure that I'm joining things like the AWS Public Sector Partner Program, the AWS Managed Service Provider Program.
Those two marry quite well together, I might add.
Maybe earning the AWS government competency, nonprofit competency, number of different ways to not just ramp up internally on these programs, but also signal externally to your customers that you're ready to take on the public sector challenges. Specialization. So we talked about specialization a lot within the context of MSPs, making sure I have deep subject matter expertise in compliance frameworks and regulations, right? Things like FedRAMP, HIPAA, maybe I'm SOC compliance. All of these are going to be very important when working with public sector customers. We've talked about the idea of having a dedicated public sector practice as well, right? With your own sales, delivery, and operational teams. And this applies to different verticals across public sector, right? Someone who's working with local government or education is going to be very different than maybe someone in the nonprofit sector or the federal government or defense sector. So making sure that you have tailored service offerings, templates, and accelerators specifically for those different public sector clients. And then maybe another best practice that fits in within our next gen MSP framework within the operations columns, right? So localized support and community engagement, making sure that we have a local presence within those public sector communities can really help our MSPs understand the unique national, state, county, regional requirements when working with state and local governments or national governments of different countries.
Within that, would you then suggest also a center of excellence that is specific to that region for the pubsec managed services practice?
Sure, I think that's a great idea. Developing that kind of deep specialization within that cloud center of excellence. Again, it's not just going to be valuable internally, but that also externally when you're going out to win some of these public tenders.
Great.
And I think lastly, within the operational framework there too, especially for some of these mission critical public sector workloads, making sure that we have robust disaster recovery and business continuity processes in place.
Great, that's wonderful. So if we're going into looking at kind of the top three things that public sector partners should focus on when they're considering specifically migration and management of a customer's cloud environment, what are those three things that a PubSec partner should focus on?
Yeah, it'd be tough to narrow it down to three, but now that we talked about sort of the best practices for building out and framing your public sector practice, let's talk about what to do from a sort of customer perspective and when you're actually doing those migrations and management. One I would say would be compliance and security, drawing back on some of what we talked about before. Public sector organizations have a lot of these strict regulatory requirements, data privacy, security, and compliance. And so partners need to make sure they have a deep understanding of those compliance frameworks and ensure that their AWS services are architected to meet a lot of those rigorous standards. And that's going to mean they need to do access controls, encryption, logging, automation, monitoring, a lot of these best practices within AWS environments overall too. Number two would probably be cost optimization. So managing cloud costs effectively is especially critical for public sector customers who are probably dealing with tighter budgets and may not have some of the in-house expertise either in those areas. So partners need to focus on things like right-sizing resources, managing unused cloud assets, implementing cost optimization and monitoring, and then also from an AWS cash, credits, and discounts perspective, taking advantage of them where we can, but then also making sure that we're in line with the compliance rules and regulations when working with public sector customers.
Wonderful.
I'd say that last of those three would just be around the migration planning and executing of itself. right? So migrating these legacy on-premise systems, and a lot of governments and public sector customers are still on-prem.
Shocking.
Just making sure that we have a structured migration methodology that's going to address aspects of workload assessment, application refactoring, data migration, user chaining, and just making sure that we're providing hands-on assistance throughout that migration journey. Remembering that within our public sector businesses, procurement may be with one area of an organization or government, and then the actual project execution and training needs to happen in another.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So we know that from the Canal study that was done a couple of years ago, still really relevant today, that about 60% of customers highlight specializations as top criteria when they're selecting a partner, and then 74% of those customers actually review the certifications twice a year, which is, I think, really, really telling. Why is validation of an MSP so important for public sector customers and partners specifically?
That's a great question. And validation in this case means a managed service provider has gone through our validation checklist and then also our one-day audit process.
From 2 days to 1 day. Big wins.
Which we launched this year, and I know a lot of partners are very excited about. I think validation is important in the pubsec side, one, because of just credibility and trust, right? An MSP who has gone through that validation process has demonstrated they have the necessary capabilities, follow best practices, they have the operational excellence to deliver those high-quality managed services on AWS. The fact that we use a third party to complete that validation helps establish trust with public sector customers who a lot of times need a higher level of vetting of their service providers and their vendors. Two, from a compliance and security standpoint, by going through that validation process, we know that the partner is following AWS security best practices and compliance requirements. And that's important for public sector customers who have data privacy and protection restrictions and frameworks and may need to comply with one of them and make sure that anybody who they're getting services from complies with them too. Yep. From a service perspective and operational excellence, we know that a partner that's been through the validation process meets those reliability, scalability, and high performance standards. And so that kind of consistent quality and assurance is necessary when a government's looking for someone to run their mission critical public sector workloads. And I think there's also sort of a flywheel effect with this as well. As you know, we've made updates to our performance-based renewal process this year, but these processes still happen. So the full audit every 3 years and then performance-based renewals after that. And so when a partner continues to renew within the MSP program, they get access to additional MDF, additional trainings and funding and working with our AWS MSP team. And so that we know they're going to just continue to enhance their public sector and MSP capabilities as well. And maybe most importantly, right, this is also a competitive advantage.
Absolutely.
Going through the MSP validation process and getting that designation. This is going to help set partners apart within the public sector market by demonstrating their expertise and commitment to delivering managed services, and then also showing that they've met this very high bar, potentially the highest of any of our specializations.
Yeah, and in some cases, the customer might directly ask for that.
It's interesting you brought that up. I was actually working with a partner who wasn't sure whether or not they wanted to renew their validation, and then the government customer that they were working with actually said, to bid on this tender, we'd like you to have this. We'd like you to have this certification to meet this bar, just to demonstrate that not only do you meet all of these different qualities and governance controls, but then you're also sort of able to pass this high bar in this audit with us.
That's wonderful. Brian, thank you so much for being with us. If you want to learn more and connect with the AWS Public Sector team, please click on the link that's in the description of the video. Thank you for being here. Let us know if you loved the content, and we will see you next time on Happy to Do It.